Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this move this. The fourth guest speaker is Professor Reshmi Trabelsi. He's a distinguished translator and interpreter and academic with a PhD in English Studies, a professor at the University of Tunis, 1978-2008. He has authored numerous works on African and post-colonial literature. He is a seasoned and freelance interpreter since 1979. He's one of the oldest and the most senior interpreters here in this region. He has translated major literary and historical books, including those of Nobel laureate Paul Soyinka. He is fluent in Arabic, French, and English. He has significantly contributed to Tunisia's literary and cultural heritage through his translations. Join me in welcoming our fourth guest speaker, second keynote speaker, Professor Reshmi Trabelsi, who will be speaking about the role of translation, about translation and identity, the case study of Hubbek Darbani novel. Over to you,
Thank you, Dr. Salhi, for this introduction, this presentation. Actually, I will focus on two main translations, which I did. The first is Hubbak Darbani, which to which I'll go back later on. And the second is How Tunisians Became Tunisians by Professor Hedi Timoumi. But I will come back to that later on. The first, let me start, therefore, with translation and identity. The first words addressed to the supposedly illiterate prophet of Islam were read, Iqra. At the origin of the world was thus the word. If you may, I would indulge in a fictionalized history of religions and conjecture that Adam and Eve had first uttered what could sound like grunts to communicate with each other before Adam was endowed with language, divine language at that. Surah 2, verse 31 of the Quran reads as follows: And he taught Adam the nature of all things. Then he placed them before the angels and said, Tell me the nature of these if you are right. Most Muslim exegetes believe that Adam was taught Allah's lofty names. One could, however, assume, away from any theogonic, religion-fraught vision, that we are dealing here with the word, that is, language, composed of words and names. Adam was then able to speak to Eve. He could well have said, Look how nice that apple is, how it smells good. We all know the sequel of the story, that is the creation of the world. What language did Adam and Eve speak? In what language did God address Adam? We suppose it was in Arabic, the language of Quranic revelation. In the best of cases, Adam and Eve were probably able to speak only Arabic. However, we all know that Moses was the author of the Genesis, written between the 15th and 30th century before Christ. Moses was a prophet who had been called upon by God to lead the children of Israel through the desert to the promised land of Canaan. I quote, And I have said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt unto the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites, unto a land flowing with honey and milk. The Exodus chapter 3, verse 17. As Moses could most probably speak only the language, the tongue of Canaan, he was therefore addressed in that tongue. The version of the Genesis in the Quran must needs derive from a translation, the work of an eminent polyglot God. See, for example, the Acts of the Prophets, chapter 2, verse 8. And how hear we every man in our own tongue, wherein we were born, unquote. It is also known that the New Testament is what Jesus and his apostles said in Aramean and Hebrew. A slave translated it into Greek and Saint Jerome into Latin. Much later, the Bible was translated into other European languages. For political rather than identity-related purposes, England, for example, in the reign of Henry VIII, had translated the Bible into English, thus marking off its distance from Latin and the Vatican. Arab civilization had known its golden age under the first Abbasid caliphs in a particularly enlightened century. It is the centuries of Caliphs al-Mansur, 754-775, al-Mahdi, 775-785, Harun al-Rashid, 786-809, and al-Ma'mun, 813-833. Under the first Abbasids, there was an enthusiastic intake of Greek thought by Arab rationalists like the Mu'tazila and the Falasifa, mainly under al-Ma'mun. At their behest, Greek rationalism had a great impact on Arab and Muslim thinkers and intellectuals. Greek and Persian civilizations, but also Indian and even Chinese, served as a starting point for the Arab Golden Age. By means of translation, therefore, of translators, they had found in those civilizations the science that their grandeur lacked, i.e., mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, and medicine. The Christian West itself owed its development and its subsequent domination of the world to the translation of the breakthroughs of Arab and Muslim thinkers and scientists. In so doing, neither the Arab world nor the West lost their identity. The Son of Allah thus shone on the West, to paraphrase the title of Sigrid Hunk's book, releasing it from its long night, Asr al-Dhulmat, the Dark Ages. But the wheel of history had turned, and the Arabs were compelled to translate Western works and thought. Hence, the importance of translation for communication, for the spread of intellectual culture, and the explanation of the cycles of a human civilization. We know and cannot but firmly condemn and reject the ills of colonization. Yet, when they wanted to impose their cultures and languages upon the people they had submitted, colonialists had, unconsciously and involuntarily, as it were, broken these people's isolation, even their aloofness and at times autarky. Though they had, in the last resort, served the interests of colonialists, Western anthropologists and Orientalists had nonetheless helped the world discover the hidden or unknown cultural treasures of those submitted peoples. They had taught their languages and cultures, which had later served many freedom fighters to use them against the very people who had inculcated them. It is interesting to note at this juncture the type of appropriation inherent in the translation process. Westerners had translated Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, Al-Kindi, Al-Razi, and many others. That is, but the West knows and recognizes only Avicenna, Averroes, Rhazes, etc. That is, under their westernized names. Al-Khwarizmi had used the work of the Greeks and Indians in his Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, and it is from the term Jabr, al-Jabr, that derives the word algebra, at first in Latin, then in the other European languages. Ibn Sina's Kitab al-Qanun, known as the Canon, for example, had been taught in some European universities until the 16th century. Thus, without mentioning the adoption and integration of hundreds of Arabic terms in European languages. Colonization had always sought to, at best, demean the colonized people's languages and cultures, if not, efface them altogether. In teaching them Western languages, they allowed them to write back, and translation is part and parcel of this writing back process. In a more serene, contemporary context, away from hegemonic wars, intellectual and scientific production in the Arab world is moving within a closed circle, enclosed onto itself, unknown to the outside world. No wonder then that the Arab Renaissance movement in the 19th century put so much emphasis on and encouraged the translation of Western intellectual production. The identity of a people is surely epitomized and enshrined in its language and culture. Yet, when such language and culture extol and result in self-containment and the rejection of the other, they cannot but hamper the development of such people. Hence, the necessity of streamlining the Arab-Muslim world in the movement of history through a resolute movement and a clear project of the translation of the Arab-Muslim heritage and thought into world languages, far from any form of chauvinism or self-glorification. It is certainly within such a scope that I decided to translate Bashir Khreif's Hubbak Darbani, which I translated as Loving You to Distraction. I thought it was a pity that what many consider as the first Tunisian novel ever remains confined to the Tunisian territory, in the best of cases in a few Arab countries. In these times, when people read less and less, Tunisia, I think, deserves more than a domestic distribution circumscribed to a few hundred readers. Our Tunisianity, between brackets, should not be a mere exercise of self-satisfaction. It is too precious a richness to let it peter out because of murderous ideologies coming from outside that try to obliterate our specificity in the name of a nebulous universalizing utopia, seeking to preserve the so-called ontological purity of a language. It was necessary to hammer home the idea that translation is the most appropriate vehicle to uncover on a large scale the riches of Tunisia. Not only is Hubbak Darbani acknowledged to be the first Tunisian novel, therefore deserving as such to be made available in world languages, but it is also remarkable for its avant-gardist linguistic approach. The mixture of standard classical Arabic with its Tunisian dialect variation, mainly in dialogues, was a novelty in those times and bitterly criticized already in the name of the so-called sacredness of the Arabic language. The shift between both variations may sometimes seem impossible to render in non-diaglossic languages. I have tried to sidestep the difficulty by the use of colloquial expressions, once or twice through crude, iconoclastic words. It is also certainly within such a scope that I chose to translate Professor Hedi Timoumi's كيف صار التونسيون تونسيين, How Tunisians Became Tunisians. I came upon the book almost accidentally, and I was attracted by its methodological approach and conclusions, and was convinced by the issues it raised. Again, I thought it was a pity that the book remains confined in the Tunisian territorial constraints. As in any process, foreign readers may thus be able to opt for an appropriation strategy because of the availability of Bashir Khraif's and Hedi Timoumi's works in their language, and interpret and assess them the way they wish. They would at least have had the pleasure, if not the privilege, of knowing us, Tunisians, better. As far as I'm concerned, I shall be fully satisfied and honored to play the role, however small it may be, of a transmission belt for the spread of knowledge. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. Because I changed the device altogether. Thank you very much for this. Is really interesting what you have outlined. I'm wondering whether the participants have questions. So I can see here where thanks. Yes, I hand it over to Jihan. I don't know whether there are questions asked because I've changed the device. I cannot have the questions in the chat box. Yes, we have Professor House first and then other questions. Over to you, Professor
Thank
House.
you very much for this very excellent presentation. I have a question regarding the division into translation types that you're probably aware of. It's called variously communicative versus descriptive, domesticating versus, what's the other thing? I don't know. Or my own categories, covert, overt. Basically what this means, there is a translation type that leaves the original text as far as possible, given the different languages, intact, okay? And the other category would be to bring the text to the reader and basically in the translation explain and adjust to the new audience such that they actually comprehend. Now, which type of translation, if possible, or a mixed one, would you suggest for the translation of literature?
I think both are necessary. Yes. You cannot exclude one at the expense of the other. Mm. You know, translation is not a word for word replacement.
Yes.
You don't take it's the whole which you should render into a language which the reader should not feel as foreign. In other words, it's more communicative, probably.
Yeah.
But the idea is to make available works that exist in some Arab countries,
yeah,
and which are not made available to the rest of the world. And I think that one of the weaknesses of most Arab countries is that they do not cater for, they do not envisage, and they do not prepare for a translation process, a whole work bulk of translation of what is interesting in their own culture.
Which is bad because it shuts off the whole heritage of the big tradition of Arabic speaking countries. If this is so, shut off and not catering to other people's interest in the Arabic speaking world. It's interesting.
Look,
it should be more known. That's what I mean.
Yeah. I agree. This is what I tried to convey, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Over to you, Jihan.
I have one question for Professor Trabelsi.
Please.
You mentioned the issue of using Tunisian Arabic in the novel by the writer Bashir Khraif as a token of Tunisian identity and also marker of Tunisianity. Now, how can the translator maintain the sense of Tunisianity while translating into other languages such as English, for example, creating the same equivalent effect as argued by Eugene Nida? And thank you, Professor.
Look, there is no exact correspondence between one language and another. The use of the Arabic dialect, the Tunisian dialect, as an Arabic variation of the language, I tried to, as I said, sidestep the difficulty by words in English. And sometimes, as I said, I even resorted to crude, extremely impolite, iconoclastic words. So I don't think it's impossible. And I think it's even easier for a Tunisian to translate into English, into up-to-date colloquial English, if obviously you have a command of both languages, if you have a good command of both languages.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Over to you again, Jihan, if there are some other questions by the participants.
There is a question by Hajar Ghaffari. Thank you very much. Here is my question. What were the major challenges you faced when you translated the Tunisian vernacular? Can you give us some examples of translation solutions for culture-sensitive expressions that were particularly challenging?
I think I've just answered. The previous question was more or less the same. As I said, I mean, it's translating Tunisian dialect passages is obviously easy to render because of the possibility of using colloquial English.
Yeah. Mm.
I hope I've been convincing.
Yes, to me you have.
To me too. Okay, yeah, any other
Yes, another question by Hajar bin Salim. How were the translated books received in the West?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's I mean, probably my work finished when I submitted the manuscript to the editor.
Yeah. Good.
Very good.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No, I believe that was the last question.
Very good. Okay. Join me in thanking again Professor Trabelsi for his insightful talk.
You're most welcome.
Much for the work you are doing for translation, for language, for culture, for Tunisia, for the world, I would say. Yes, so let's move on now to the fifth guest speaker, Dr. Al-Abidi, and we allow Abidi to get ready now. Dr. Abidi is an assistant professor at Tunis Business School, specializing in applied linguistics, media discourse, with over 20 years of teaching experience in Tunisia and Saudi Arabia. His research spans critical discourse and Arabic media. His publications explore politics, critical discourse analysis, digital culture, and he is leader in the socio-cognitive impact and social media. So I give the floor to Dr. Al-Abidi. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Can you please choose the right... Abidi, can you choose the right...
Hello, everyone.
Oh, but can you choose the right presentation, PowerPoint presentation? Because you are sharing...
Sorry.
I can only see Professor Trabelsi and nobody else.
The Zoom, exactly.
You're everywhere, Professor.
Well, yes,
Sorry.
present.
You're all over the screen.
Exactly.
Okay.
So can you bring Dr. Abidi and then share your screen? But you need...
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, please. Where is...
Try to open the PowerPoint presentation first, and then go to share screen, and then choose the PowerPoint presentation.
It's already opened.
Yes.
I will see. Okay, sorry.
Dr. Abidi, do you need any help? Yes, I think we can see some... No, this is from
Just a while.
agency.
Nice music.
Yeah.
That's not what we want to see or hear. Again, I can only say Professor Trabelsi is enlarged again.
Yes.
You are colonizing all the other speakers.
I'm sorry about that.
You're not doing
Yeah,
it.
perhaps it's a feature also to put the Professor Trabelsi, and it is a feature on Zoom. So we are going to deal with it. He deserves all the spotlight, but have a next guest speaker.
You have somebody in Zoom who
but
particularly venerates you.
too much is too much.
Absolutely.
Dr. Abidi, share your screen.
Do I need to switch off the video?
Yeah, do it. Then we have your
Yes.
name only, like
Yes.
I do with mine now, and you
Okay.
put the name.
Okay,
But
okay.
you're still very big. Even your name is very big now.
Wow.
Your name is
What a compliment.
absolutely. I think he has connections to the Zoom. That's
Well, thank you.
Yes.
you're being paid by Zoom to do this.
Yeah.
Well, where's the speaker, Hammouda?
I will try to connect with the speaker, but I'm wondering, Dr. Cherny is almost ready or not? So, Dr. Cherny, are you with us?
I'm ready, yeah.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah,
So
okay.
can we have you first?
Yes,
Do
share
you
the
have me for
screen.
lunch or for dinner?
For both. and for a journey. It's better that involves discovery lunch, dinner and sightseeing.
What a relevant question.
Yes. Okay. So very good. Now, yes, please, Dr. Abidi. I'm wondering whether you are ready or not. So this is perhaps the last call before Craft
I
takes
can
off.
see he's trying to connect. He has connection issues.
Well,
Let's
why
connect.
don't we get the
Yes.
next speaker
Yeah.
first?
Yes, next speaker. Dr. Cherny, please, over to you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Looks like the internet is not stable these days. I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah.
It's probably the weather. Is
Yeah.
is there a Sahara
No,
storm?
it is warm. No, there's no storm actually.
Good.
Nothing. Okay, I will share my presentation here.
Mm.
Good. Yes.
Oh, yes, we
Fine.
have. Yeah, good. Mm.
It is visible, I hope.
Yes.
All right.
Just a gentle reminder, if you can bit the mic a little bit close. It is a pleasant
this is
experience listening to you, but yes, a little bit closer, that would make it even more pleasant. Thank you.
How's that?
Much better. Thank you.
Much better. I can actually switch on to the analog device. So maybe this is even much better.
Yes, even.
Okay, good. All right, I'm really pleased to contribute with this modest presentation on based on one of the experiences I had as interpreter, but also on which I had done some reading and some research, and so it has to do with the experience of interpreting in environments different than the booth, including specifically in times of migration crises, where the interpreter could be the site of different experiences, undergoing certain other challenges and facing issues that are not dealt with in a conventional form of interpreting environment. This is the situation, and I'm sorry. This is actually Hammouda remembers very well, because Hammouda and I shared this experience where we served for 3 weeks in Thessaloniki, in the neighborhood of
How come I forget this?
Macedonian border during the massive Syrian migration to Europe. And this is the first day we arrived, and this is the situation and how we found it. Needless to say that it was early March, and the situation in terms of weather was extremely hostile. It was very cold, very rainy, And the first encounters are quite shocking, actually, because I remember the first person I have seen was a pregnant woman who just crossed the river, and she was trembling, shivering of cold, and the situation was actually going out of control. The EASO, European Agency for Asylum Seekers at that time, was handling the matter, but they were not equipped for this, sorry, in any possible way. And it was a very, very painful experience personally. I learned a great deal from that. So migration situation, apart from their definition as massive movement of people voluntarily or under coercion, and the situation was both actually, represented an extremely different environment. And I guess just traveling to site could be simply one of the basic, let's say, requirements of being deployed in such situations is, first of all, to adapt to the environment and to be prepared to cope with humanitarian crises and challenges to which you cannot really stay indifferent, because your work would include specifically more than interpreting, but it could be cultural mediation skills. Apart from learning a great deal, especially about the narratological elements of the stories being told by asylum and migration seekers. First, it is the familiarity with their homeland. In this case, I'm talking about Syrians in the first place. But most importantly, it is to stay focused on your mission, because you will be deployed for 10, 12 hours a day, working in different environments, sometimes interviews, sometimes receiving applications, etc. But then being specifically very alert to the bonds that may develop between you and the migrants because of the sense of affiliations you may encounter, specifically based on ethnic affiliations, religion, and other backgrounds. In our case, it was language, it was religion, it was ethnicity, let's say. We considered ourselves all Arabs and Arabic language seekers, which actually made the migrants often look at you at more than interpreter, but sometimes as their savior, because they considered you as part of the solution and not as simple mediator. So beyond the linguistic competence, actually, there is this intercultural and emotional burden you have to cope with. As mediator, you have to navigate not only linguistic barriers, but also cultural, social differences between the migrants and host countries. Here I take the example of some families that arrived, and polygamous men who had 2 and 3 wives, and they simply were informed that they could not really be admitted into European soil, being husbands to more than one wife. And I remember a man who had 2 wives with their children, and on the spot he said, I can divorce one of them right now. I have no problem, and I can divorce both of them. So the situation actually was quite challenging sometimes, how to interpret or try to explain what is actually required. That was quite problematic. The second element is actually this emotional proximity and professional attachment. Sometimes you become emotionally entangled because some of the stories are really very, very touching and sometimes very tragic. And this makes you move actually from simple mediator or technical language mediator to helper. More than that, we have extremely challenging power dynamics, because migrants often see you as their advocates and not simply as mediators. Sometimes you actually forget your neutrality, and you find yourself sometimes more advocating certain cases at the expense of others. depending on the age, on the situation, etc. So that's one of the risks actually that may occur. Apart from that, once you finish your day and you go home, sometimes you find that actually that psychological impact is there with you because you experience trauma and often varying levels of compassion fatigue. Compassion is actually when you, I'm sorry. Compassion is actually that when you don't try, actually, it happens unconsciously when you um, become entangled with the stories and you actually become emotionally involved in some of them, and you try to support in a way or another, but you find that it's quite traumatic, and you go home and you deal with all those traumatic stories of I remember one specific child who I think he was like 10 or 11 years old, and he was on his own. He was simply walking with the other group, and he explained to everyone that he was staying at his aunt's place, and we left his aunt's home and went to see his parents. He found that their house was simply destroyed immediately. He found it entirely destroyed. And when he went back to his aunt's place, he found that other house actually was also destroyed, and he found himself on his own. And so there was a group of people who were walking uh, to cross Macedonia into Greece, and he simply joined them because he had nobody else to stick to. So in a way, it makes you experience that moral and ethical dilemma. This is a victim, and you should be considering maybe helping other than simply taking a story and translating. And the most curious thing about it is that sometimes you take the story and you don't translate the story as it is, but you tick certain answers, or there's a short list that you need to fill in, and you simply put the age, the sex, the gender, certain information about the family, etc. But then after that, during the interview, that child would have to go through essentially very, very, let's say, aggressive interviews to make sure that the child was not lying, that actually he had a family somewhere else, uh, because otherwise they would have top priority in any sense. Stress and burnout, that is, luckily we were off the weekends, but actually a day was enough because all the stories you see during the day, they would haunt you at night, and you feel actually exhausted. You feel emotionally exhausted. Apart from physically exhausted, you feel actually that emotional exhaustion. Um, Another aspect, it is how to cope with that emotional proximity that develops between you and some people you would see every day in those camps sometimes, but also find some form of professional detachment. Because unlike conference or business work, migration interpreting obliges you to work closely with vulnerable populations, and you develop a sense of compassion for them, a sense of need to support them. You find that they are exposed to very important stakes. They face certain risks, including human trafficking and sometimes family separation, because sometimes families are not simply forwarded to the same places, but sometimes, according to age and according to certain qualifications, they are sent sometimes even to different countries. So while neutrality is actually a professional requirement, that emotional proximity makes that detachment almost impossible, because you end up, in a way or another, developing a sense of empathy, but also a certain sense of guilt, but sometimes helplessness that may affect you in a way or another. You feel like you failed them in a way or another. Working as advocate, sometimes you find yourself obliged here doing more than language facilitation. Um, sometimes you are under the stress of certain people who would say, could you explain better? Could you, and when you say, can you explain to them better what they actually saying, it implies quite simply, can you convince them? Because I know you can. That's what they think. They think that you can convince those people when you're taking their stories to convince them to accept them and to approve of their applications and to help them leave that situation, that camp on the border. That pressure sometimes ends up bridging certain gaps between you and those groups, but sometimes also makes the other people suspicious of you. Are you really reliable as professional or not? And that is also another dilemma that you may face. And so navigating those situations also expose you ethically to certain principles. You sometimes have to convince other people not to lie, because you can sense that some people, some of them, under the obligation of things, may end up by, let's say, providing some fiction and some like fabricating stories about their displacement and their distress and their helplessness, that they were victims of the fighting groups, etc. But actually, we know that they are not. And sometimes you end up simply telling them it's not the best way actually to find your way through, but it's better to stick to one credible story. And here you become sometimes that advocate that explains that. Now I come to the theoretical aspect, which actually I try to explore, and I call this framing, this conflict that is experienced by the interpreter in such situations. And here I try to provide some of an overview of some of the theoretical frames that account for such situations. The first one is the TKI, and it is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. This instrument is a model that categorizes conflict management styles based on the two essential factors we will see here. The first one is assertiveness, specifically how much you prioritize needs, and how much here, the implication here, to what extent can the interpreter actually be faithful in prioritizing those needs. The second one is cooperativeness, how much you prioritize the needs of others. That is, how can you actually strike a balance between those different needs, that is, individual needs of the people you are coping with, and end up by supporting them in a way or another. And these lead us to the 5 conflict styles, essentially, that may be applicable to situations of interpreting. The first one is competing, win-lose, that is high assertiveness, that is low cooperativeness. Collaborating, here is a win-win. Compromising, it is a moderate assertiveness and cooperativeness. This applies more to the situations I was talking about. And here it is bringing both sides to reach a solution. And the example here is like asylum seekers agree to split families and to be forward to different homes and environments. And sometimes you find yourselves involved in trying to convince them to do so. So you actually go beyond your simple work of translating and interpreting to do that. The avoidance, or the lose-lose, and here it's low assertiveness, low cooperativeness, and it is postponing the resolution. An example here is those individuals sometimes that remain silent, or the interpreter that remains silent when one of the applicants says something that you think is not actually in their favor. So here you end up by losing some impartiality to become helper and avoid potential disagreements that might affect the applicant. Accommodating, and here it is the lose-win situation. Kilmann defines it here as low assertiveness and high cooperativeness. examples here of convincing the migrants to accept certain offers. Also, they were way below what they expect. And here you act as an influence on their decision making, but you don't know actually if that decision is suitable or not. The last one is application, and it helps interpreters assess how they handle the conflicts, the way they do it, and whether it is actually fruitful. But in the end, the work of the interpreter here is not in terms of assessing how professional you have been, but how successful you have been in helping find a solution for a number of people, especially those with whom you develop certain, towards whom you develop a very clear empathy. The second theoretical framework, it's the IBR, it's what we call the interest-based relational approach. It is developed by Roger Fisher and William Ury, and it focuses on problem solving rather than confrontation. This is actually one of the most common situations when it comes to clear conflict between those who don't know whether they accept a certain offer or they keep asking for more. And here it is to avoid specifically those rushes of anger sometimes that erupt because some of those individuals have been in those camps for a couple of months waiting, living under a plastic tent, having limited access to food in very poor hygiene conditions. And so the situation sometimes becomes tense. Here, the second aspect, the second principle is to focus on interests. And here, sometimes you become a judge, actually, because you think that out of the 3-4 solutions proposed, one of them is in the best interest of the person, and you try to convince them to accept it. And this is how you end up actually being not interpreter, but sometimes you're a biased side or a biased party in the negotiation. Sometimes you have to appease things and generate some form of mutual gain situation. That is how we find multiple solutions, and we offer those individuals the possibility to choose one of them. That is according to their choices, which often involve proximity to their family members, staying as a family together, because often asylum conditions is that only a father and a mother with dependent children can stay together. That is, adult children 18 and above can actually find themselves in different countries if ever their applications are accepted. And so here the interpreter acts in what she or he considers the best interest of the migrant. That is, becomes here an advocate and sometimes an influence, good or bad, that depends upon. Now, the other frame is what we call attribution theory, developed by Fritz Heider. And here we talk about 3 types of attributions, actually 4, sorry. Internal attributions, that is blaming conflict on personal traits. Sometimes you think that the migrant has been arrogant or has been high demanding. External attributions, you blame them on the circumstances because they tell you that they cannot take more than one. And so you simply try to reassure in a way the applicant that that's the situation. How does it work for the interpreter? The internal attribution is the interpreter often would explain that by considering certain issues that have to do with traits or characters known to him but not clear to the migrant here. I said but also to the client. The client here, I'm talking about the agency, that is the migration experts that process the applications. The external application here is that the interpreter may consider that the migrant is victim of a certain external circumstances beyond their control, and may explain that to them in a way just to assure them that they have to postpone and they have to be patient. They have to postpone their requests and wait because there are priorities. This is specifically in medical situations. The last one is face negotiation theory, developed by Stella Tangitumes in the 80s and 90s. And this considers specifically how face, self-image, and reputation may influence conflict resolutions, but also certain negotiations. This is much more applicable to the situation of interpreting and migration sites and migration conflict situations. It has to do with direct confrontation, being part of face-to-face negotiations in which you become part of that. And it has to do with being aware specifically of the nature of those cultures. Individualistic cultures, this is the host culture, we're talking about European culture in a way, and collectivistic cultures attributed often to Japan and China, but it's more Oriental, in which, for example, the attitude and the reactions of the people are decided more by their gender and their culture. So in a way, you would find men much more demanding, much more aggressive, while women are much more, let's say, passive and are not seeking any form of request or of favor other than being out of that situation. So in a way, dignity here would become the most important issue, but that dignity takes a gender dimension, etc., of which, of course, you would be aware. And this requires from the interpreter dynamic presence and often theatrical skills, because you have to move. It's like the mediator, negotiator. So you have to move between those groups and the processors of the applications in order to find some form of compromise. So in a way, sometimes in a separate room, you will find the angry man, and on the other side, you will find the women crying, and on the other side, you will find the processors of the applicants who don't know actually what to do with both situations, because they take the anger of the men as a form of impoliteness, or maybe as a form of haughtiness, but is actually some form of loss of dignity. And maybe it's like being stripped of certain authority and a certain privilege.
Sorry,
So,
Dr.
in a way,
Cherny, time is up. Please, can you try to
yes,
wrap up to move
this is the
to
last.
the next
This is
speaker,
the
who
last
is?
slide.
Please go
This
ahead.
is the
Thank you.
last slide. Yes.
Very good.
So communication accommodation theory here, it's the one developed by Howard Guys. It explains how people adjust their communication styles in conflict. So two key strategies here, we're talking about conversions, adapting speech to match the other person, diversions, emphasizing difference and making the others aware of them. And I think that it's the most practical frame for such field interpreting missions. One is seeking convergence by adapting speech and attitudes, downplaying differences and acting as mediator instead of technical translator. And this is, I personally recommend as the field of training and for any people to be deployed in such situations, because it should include both the theoretical aspect, but also some form of simulation exercises that would take into consideration all those aspects we have mentioned earlier. And thank you very much. I'll stop sharing so we can leave the floor for our colleague.
Yes.
Thank you for your attention again.
Thank you, Dr. Cherny, for your powerful and insightful presentation on interpreting, basically interpreting in refugee camps. The words and the talk really resonate with me as they brought back memories of my experience with you in the area of Thessaloniki. I think it is a good methodology if we move straight to the last speaker, if he is ready, Dr. Abidi, and then we combine both discussions or sessions, Q&A sessions, if this is convenient to you. But before that, I would like to, I missed the introduction. I would like to introduce Dr. Cherny. So I would like to ask if the Dr. Cherny CV is displayed on screen. So Dr. Cherny is an assistant professor and conference interpreter who holds a PhD from the University of Manuba. He specializes in literature, media studies, and translation with a passion for cross-cultural communication. He teaches translation theory and social studies, bridging linguistic and cultural gaps. His work explores the intersection of language and society, emphasizing on transformative power of translation in shaping global understanding and media discourse. This is our guest speaker, ladies and gentlemen, whom you have just heard. So we are, with your permission, we are going to move now to the last speaker, Dr. Mohammed Abidi, and I hope Dr. Mohammed Abidi is ready. Hello, Dr. Abidi, are you there? Hello? I'm wondering whether, let me check if he is connected. Yes. Dr. Mohammed, yes. He's sharing his screen now. It works fine.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, please, over to you. Can you, but I need to introduce you first, displaying the, but you stepped in, which is a good sign. But let me read to your CV.
Okay.
You stop sharing for a while, Dr. Abidi, and then we need to display, well, this is a practice, a common practice. Yes. So Dr. Abidi is an assistant professor also at Tunis Business School, specializing in applied linguistics. And we have reviewed already this, but it is a very good, it's very good to remind the audience with your resume. Specializing in translation studies, media discourse, with over 20 years of teaching experience in Tunisia and Saudi Arabia. His research spans critical discourse analysis, sociolinguistics, and Arabic media translation. He has produced publications exploring political discourse, digital culture, and forensic linguistics. So without further ado, I hand it over to you, Dr. Abidi, for 20 minutes or so. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hammouda. Sorry for the technical hitch.
Yes, no worries. This happens. Can you try sharing your screen now? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for the technical hitch, and really it's a pleasure for me to take part in this thought-provoking webinar and contribute with the topic entitled Challenges and Misunderstandings in Tunisian Arabic Translation and Multimodal Discourse Analysis. In this talk, I will walk you through the following outline. Sorry.
I'm wondering whether you are switching the slides, because we only see the cover page. And the presentation disappeared. Yes, it is back. But I think the wrong. Can you stop sharing and share the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Okay. As I said, I will in this talk I will walk you through the following outline. First of all, we'll deal with background to the study, followed by research questions. Then we'll explain the methodology used to answer these research questions. Next, we'll move to discuss the findings, and we'll end up with conclusion and recommendation. To start with the background to the study, so we have Tunisian translation. Why we choose Tunisian translation? You know that it's Tunisian Arabic, being diglottic and a patchwork of multilingual influences and accents, is rich with discursive and pragmatic features, as well as cultural references like idioms, satire, and cultural references. Was mostly used in drama and sitcoms and other mediated discourses like amid diplomatic and business meeting ones. Okay, despite these qualities, there is still positive research regarding Tunisian Arabic translation in multimodal discourses. For this reason, the present study aims to prove the linguistic and non-verbal challenges in translating and interpreting Tunisian Arabic across different discourse types using a multimodal discourse analysis framework. Okay, for the research questions, as you can see, we have raised 3 research questions. The first one is related to how do pragmatic and socio-cultural features of Tunisian Arabic underlie translation and interpreting challenges across different discourse types. The next one is how can non-verbal semiotic resources influence the translation? I mean, dubbing, subtitling and dubbing of Tunisian Arabic in multimodal communication contexts. And the last one is what adaptive translation strategies can effectively mitigate intercultural misunderstanding. Moving to the research methodology adopted for this study, it was basically qualitative approach. First of all, for the data description and collection, we opted for 3 different discourse types. The sitcoms here chosen it was Nsibti Laziza. In English we say my dear mother-in-law. And then mediated political debates post the revolution. And then the final one is business meetings. To collect data, we used video slots of videos, video recordings. They are available on YouTube, and transcripts. Okay, for the media discourse analysis frameworks, there are 3 analytical dimension or levels targeted. The first one is discursive features or cues, including pragmatic aspects such as idioms, satire, and cultural references. These are, I mean, here we use it here Byron framework for thematic analysis. We read the transcripts, and then we coded the discursive features that are potential, that are possible, that can pose translation challenges, and then we classify them into different categories: idioms, satire, or cultural references. Then the second level is paralinguistic features or cues, including tonality, intonation, and stress in speech, or suprasegmental features. The last one is non-verbal cues. Here we refer to body language like kinesics or facial expression, hand gestures, and auditory moods. For the tools used, as I said earlier, we we use Byron's framework for semantic analysis, and then ELAN software to to study the paralinguistic and non-verbal cues. Now concerning the first results, the results for the first research questions, the categories or discursive categories or features targeted were idioms and their potential, let's say, translational challenge. Okay, we have here different examples for the idiomatic expressions that we identified in this video slots. يعرف من أين, in Arabic we say يعرف من أين تؤكل الكتف, commenting on his mate. This for literal translation, it can be he knows how to eat the lamb or the meat. Sorry, but here we find that there is the intended pragmatic meaning is skilled at dating. But here, if you use literal translation, there will be a mistake here. There will be a pragmatic failure. But we need to go to take into account the context here. Given the context, the or literal translation fails to convey the intended meaning. So we have to use adaptation strategies, and the translation can be he knows whom to date. The next one is which is purely Tunisian. فيها زيزي. Literal translation here, he went in it, but the pragmatic meaning is he is in deep trouble. So to overcome overcome the translation problem or difficulty, we need to use cultural substitution to ensure comprehensibility. Moving to the second discourse feature is satire, and here we need to take into account the context. Satire was usually widely used in political discourse and sitcoms, and it raises here challenges, translation challenge, as it relies on cultural knowledge, irony, and humor. You know, if you want to have a pragmatic translation, you need to take into account, you need to have what you call, to have a good command of cultural knowledge. I mean, you know, what does culture, you need to have culture awareness. You need to know what does it mean when we say, for example, an expression, an idiom or style. In the sitcom, Sibti Al-Aziza is embedded in exaggerated speech, tone, and body language. We need, to take into account the body language here, the use of hands, and even the eye or facial expression, to decipher the intended meaning here. Mediated political debates frequently use sarcasm and wordplay, which can be misinterpreted without cultural background knowledge. For example, in post-revolution political discourse, politicians often mark the first decade of government using metaphors. Here they often use al-ashriya al-sawda here. If we translate here, which is translated into the black decade in English, but it's often used sarcastically here in political debates. They try to, criticize the government, or so the translation challenge here. There may be a loss of ironic tone in written subtitles. What the solution suggests is we need to use stylistic annotation, for example, italics or punctuation in subtitling. The last feature, proverbs were found to be used in sitcoms frequently. For example, in Arabic we say تحبها جراية وما تاكلش الشعير. The literal meaning is, do you want it to run faster without eating barley? The pragmatic meaning or intended meaning is no gain without pain. So we need to use to solve this translation problem, we need to use dynamic equivalents such as for each game. Another feature that is found in Tunisian Arabic is code switching in business meetings. You know that code switching is typical of Tunisian dialect or Arabic. For example, in business meeting, هي on va signer l'accord, mais خليني نشوف مع المدير. This we will sign the agreement, but let me speak with the manager here. So the problem is that the switching between languages can add socio-pragmatic meaning, which may be lost in translation here. Concerning the research question, the second research question, non-verbal semiotic resources and their role in pragmatic interpretation. Yeah, the first focal area is gestures and facial expression. In the sitcom and Folks, exaggerated hand movement and facial expression contribute to comedic delivery, or can create laughter. As you can see here, screenshots from the Ilan. Yeah, the first one is called Fahem. How for the Tunisian white speaking, they can use their hand gestures. So if you focus on non-verbal communication, you can go to the extra mile. As a translator, you can go to the extra mile and find and translate it effectively or accurately. In business meetings and political debates, facial cues like raised or eyebrow or smirks indicate sarcasm or skepticism, which this can be lost in translation. For the intonation and tonality, Tunisian Arabic uses intonation to express irony and politeness or urgency. And in subtitling or dubbing, you need the dubber or the subtitler need to mimic here, try to mimic the actor or the character, and modulate his tone here to convey the same meaning or effect. The last one, results of the third question, is domestication. The different adaptive translation strategies that can be used are domestication and cultural substitution, as Julian has explained here. For the next one is we can use equivalent expression in the target language, as Baker he advocated. For example, في بالي بالمخبل في كبة. This is purely Arabic, Tunisian, which means I know everything, and we can render it as I'm privy to all tiny details in English, dialect English. We can also use explicitation and paraphrasing. Here, the example given is in non-verbal communication here, haptics. If the touch one's shoulder, we call this haptics. This can be meaningful in Tunisian Arabic, but unknown to the target audience. We can add here in subtitling, we can add here annotation here between parentheses, gloating over can clarify intent here. We can also use multimodal contextualization here by Crescent and Ewan. Here we try to synchronize linguistic, paralinguistic, and non-verb cues in dubbing. This is one solution. For the conclusion, in this study we have explored the complexity of Tunisian Arabic translation in multimodal discourse types. What we find is that pragmatic features like idioms, satire, and cultural references pose translation challenges. The second insight or finding is that non-verbal cues, I mean gesture, tone, facial expression, shape meaning, but are hard to translate here. Adaptive strategies like domestication, explicitation, and multimodal synchronization can enhance translation accuracy. So finally, we can say that using a context-sensitive adaptive translation approach can enhance intercultural communication and mitigate misunderstandings in multimodal discourse contexts. Thank you for your attention.
And I should thank you also for your insightful talk about translation strategies and how to relay Tunisian Arabic content to English or other languages. Thank you very much, Dr. Labidi, for this presentation again. And it's my pleasure now to host a question and answer session for both talks. May I ask Dr. Cherny also to be on screen with us? And I would like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to raise your yellow hand or ask questions on the chat box, or yes, Professor House, over to you.
Okay, I have a comment to Nabil, if I may call you Nabil. Thank you very much for an excellent and I would say passionate presentation for the plight of refugees. I would suggest that you refrain from using Tinctomais, overgeneralization. There are, in our age, globalized age, I don't think we can speak of individualistic and collectivistic cultures any longer. I myself have been to China many times. I have an honorary professorship there. I've also been to Japan several times. And I don't think that these cultures can, with any degree of certainty, be called collectivistic nowadays. China is a capitalist, very capitalistic, worse than the United States, I would say, from my knowledge also of university and businesses. Siemens, German company, and Volkswagen have bases there. And if you talk to the managers there, they would agree. Anyway, so with your excellent presentation and your knowledge, etc., I would advise you take your distance from such generalizations. That's all I want to say. Also, the gender stuff about Asian women and women being this and that, this is no longer valid nowadays. In our days, this is an old, outdated theory, unworthy of an excellent scholar like you.
Thank you very much, Professor House, for this comment. And
he
I'm wondering,
doesn't say anything. Why don't you respond, Nabil?
perhaps I'm asking him for just any reaction to this comment.
Yes, thank you for your comment. I'm not taking that as taken for granted. It's not a taken for granted issue. It is the theorists who take the example of Oriental societies as opposed to Western societies. I know that Japan is much more individualistic than Germany in any respect. Even demographically speaking now, the number of individuals who live on their own in Japan bypasses by far the number of Germans living on their own.
Germany is also an aging society. Look at me. I'm nearly 83 years old, living on my own. There are many people like that, many elderly women, and they're not individualistic or collectivistic or whatever. They're just human.
No.
Human beings, Nabil.
No, that's the human aspect, but the sociological definition is different. The sociological definition is that people who live on their own and do not have a family, a regular family connection that is every day, are considered as individualistic societies. Maybe people meet on the weekend, but as you mentioned in China, and I had an excellent talks with people who actually also lived in China, including some French people, intellectuals actually, who have been there teaching there, and they're telling me very, very shocking stories about how life is there, especially in terms of planning the future for individual life rather than for a collective one. When it comes to the gender issue, I would like to assure you, and this is my firsthand experience, what I have noticed there is this big disparity between the behavioral attitudes of men and women, Syrian men and women who were at the border and who actually tended to be either aggressive, very demanding, expecting some form of restoration of their authority somehow, which has been taken away from them by that displacement. And the women who find themselves sometimes following against their will, but who face the unknown. And that actually was my impression. And it's something I actually remember until now. I have cases, and I'm sure Hammouda maybe would remember some of those cases. Women who maybe did not choose to leave Syria, but they were under the coercion of leaving it because they were following their husbands who were leaving the country for another opportunity. But in terms of demands, the men were much more demanding. And I explained that by simply that displacement that took from them away their authority and their, let's say, independence in a way. So
Yes,
that gender issue is something I can really assure you it was
yes,
there.
I totally agree when you limit this part with what you just described is definitely true for this part of human society, but not in general. That's what I wanted to say. For the sections of population you examined, like the refugees.
Yeah.
It's probably totally true. I totally agree. But don't generalize it all over the place with grand notions like individualistic cultures and collectivists. You don't need this. What you research is totally valid as it is, but not blowing it over to world validity or whatever. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Don't challenge you on what you said. Of course, you
No.
know
Thank you.
much more than
Thank
me.
you for
We understand
Absolutely.
better.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I don't think that you are in disagreement of views, but certainly
No,
you complement each other. Yeah.
No.
Great. So, Nabil, as I already said, your talk brought back memories of our shared experience in Thessaloniki, where we navigated very intricate and delicate profession and assignment over there. We were trying to strike a very fine balance, a very delicate balance between language, trust, culture, and human connection. And we were present over there, and here I'm using the personal once again, as more as human beings rather than as professionals who are conducting a task. And I cannot here disclose some of the experiences we've shared with, and I totally agree with you that male refugees have been much more, even bold, not demanding. With your story with one refugee, when we came across that refugee in downtown Thessaloniki. So this is, again, the refugee camp is yet another place for encounters. Encounters not only for translations, but encounters for resilience, for hope. And I think the interpreter is part and parcel of this encounter, of this experience of resilience and hope. My question to you, as interpreters, we stand at the crossroads of professionalism and perhaps deep human connection. I'm aware that in codes of ethics, most interpreters are requested to refrain from engaging and going the extra mile and be more professional. So how can you explain now this balance between professionalism and the humanity, the human side in an interpreter, whether we can go the extra mile and we can act as a human beings, or just we act as professionalism? So what is the scope of professionalism? This is my question. To what extent we can go?
I think that in my presentation, when I tried to frame this theoretically, I have mentioned that it's different. When you are in a booth, you do your best to be the technical mediator. That is, you try to find the expression, sometimes even dealing with metaphors or images or whatever you can, depending on your skills, depending on your familiarity with the topic, whether it is legal, medical, whatever. But when you are dealing with a human situation, you do not really have a shield that can keep you away from that emotional entanglement. And I call this compassion, and it's definitely recognized in psychoanalysis as a compassion fatigue. That is, when you work a day, when you have we all have been through hard days of interpreting where actually you're in the booth struggling with very lousy speakers, let me say it, or very technical speakers who expect you to be to follow what they're doing. That's exhausting, but it's mentally exhausting. At the end of the day, when you go home, you are mentally exhausted. But there's a big difference when you go home and you are emotionally exhausted, because you have also to make use of that emotional support you have, and that responding to that form of affiliation that you experience. Because many of them, when they ask you to say, where are you from? You say Tunisia. Oh, we say Syria. We love Tunisia. We respect Tunisians, etc. And then afterwards you say, you know, my story, and can you help me with this? They think you are on the other side in terms of decision making, so you are a facilitator, but at the same time they take you for granted as being on their side emotionally, and so somehow they rely on you as their passage. And sometimes you feel, depending on the stories you hear and the stories you deal with, that sometimes your work does not stop actually at translating their stories or making that resume and checking and filling in the checklist of that information and data that they would be used to be processed automatically in order to forward them somewhere. So you're bound to slip away from any of those situations and to play those different roles. That's definitely the situation. You can do that. I don't know if somebody, let's say, and you remember there was with us a Greek lady who spoke Arabic because she lived in Lebanon, and I think she confirmed the same thing. She was talking about how she could help some in a way or another. So in a way, your work is no more simply as interpreter, but as a human interpreter who has to deal with a human situation and who becomes involved and who thinks he may actually contribute in a way or another to saving some of those people, especially those who are under pressing need to be supported.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Dr. Shekra Allani, over to you. Please unmute yourself, Dr. Allani.
Yes, I'm trying to, yes, here. Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm very impressed by such an inspiring presentations of the speakers. I've been following from my office to my home to the car so that I don't miss anything. So it's really very inspiring. And so the last speaker, I think Dr. Muhammad Abidi, talked about translation of dialects. And I happened to go through a proverb, Tunisian proverb that says "سابقة وجراية وما تعرف الشعير." When I tried to translate it to in English, I consulted generative AI. And that is where I believe generative AI fails us, because it translates also no pain, no gain. But when that's not what my parents taught me about this proverb. They said, when you really want a good bargain, you say "سابقة وجراية ما تعرف الشعير." So here we have to be very careful with generative AI. All right, unless you can explain to me why you selected no pain, no gain. Because I know generative AI can help a lot with translation, as the professor said, that it makes us like overcome the hard work of translation, makes us focus more on creativity. That's right. But I mean, I believe that when it comes to dialects, generative AI does fail us. Can
Okay.
you?
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
please.
Here, the translation, the interpretation of this proverb depends on context. In the context
Right.
within the sitcom, it's the let's say the best way to translate this proverb. Okay. I mean here, if you don't work, you don't gain. Here, تحبها سباقة وما تاكلش الشعير. We say we can use this proverb in Tunisian dialect here.
In different
But
contexts.
interpretation depends on context. In that context,
Okay.
the best definition is that.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Proverbs are also context dependent and also culture
Right.
dependent. Certainly. Thank you very much. I will hand it over now to my dear colleague Fadlawi. Are there any questions on the chat or the question and answer?
Yes.
And please, Professor Troubles, if you'd like to step in anytime. I know that you are using your physical hand. You are muted, Professor.
I've been following. Don't worry.
Thank you very much.
I've been following.
Very good. Over to you, Ms. Fadlawi.
Okay, there is a question by Hajar bin Haj Salim. Have Arab professional interpreters and scholars developed an alternative theoretical framework to address these ethical challenges, considering that all the theoretical models referenced in this presentation are rooted in Western perspectives? This issue is particularly concerning given that the Arab world has been a focal point for numerous conflicts involving displacement.
Perhaps this is a question to Dr. Cherny?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I missed the last part because my internet.
Okay, I will read.
Please read it.
Yes, please.
Have Arab professional interpreters and scholars developed an alternative theoretical framework to address these ethical challenges, considering that all the theoretical models referenced in this presentation are rooted in Western perspectives? This issue is particularly concerning given that the Arab world has been a focal point for numerous conflicts involving displacement.
Yeah, thank you. Clear now. I don't know really of any theories or theorists in the Arab world that have worked on such issues, apart from maybe few comments that would refer specifically to the main source, which have to do with theories of communication in general and translation studies and translation theories in particular. Whether this has been the subject of interest of certain academics or not, I have no idea. I tried to find any work, papers, or books or anything on translation for migration, for migrants or in migration crises, or specifically cultural mediation in the Arab world, etc. But I found a couple works on, and they are contrastive discourse analysis of the peace discussions between Palestinians and the Israelis long time ago, that is from the early 80s and 78. And again, it is a university in the occupied territories that did the work specifically to mention this. For the moment, for example, very little has been done, for example, to analyze the discourse of the ongoing crisis now in Gaza and the exchange of prisoners, and very little has been done on that, because I think that comparative discourse analysis is still a field that is not very well developed in our universities. In the Arabic language departments, they are not interested in contrast or comparison with other languages. The cultural issue or intercultural dimension is very, very shyly dealt with in the language and social or humanities in general. Those institutions that give more importance to these have to do with international relations, and they sometimes offer courses in mediation, in cultural mediation, in intercultural learning, but also cultural institutions and cultural conversation in general. Apart from that, I have no idea whether there is a program for that or there is an interest in that. Definitely.
Thank you. But I don't think that there is a framework specific to the Arab world. I think frameworks are global, and it is the contribution of all cultures of countries. And here I would like to have the opinion of Professor House. So may you step in also to respond to this question, but also to perhaps add something else.
Yes,
and then Professor Trabelsi. Over to you, Professor House.
Mona Baker, as you know, is a native of Egypt, and she has written extensively on ethical issues of translation. She has also, like myself, very strong views about the Israeli war in Gaza and in general the situation with the Palestinians, and I'm sure she will write about this as well, which I'm looking forward to. She's very active on social media. I follow her there on various social media agencies, so I can only recommend you to follow what Mona Baker, and she is a very, very well-known and scholar as well. I wanted to add another thought about the discussion, Hammouda and Nabil, you reflected on the dual role of the interpreter as a human being and as a language mediator. We have an interesting situation in Germany, and as you know, Germany has taken most of the immigrants, very many Syrians, and also millions, etc. And because of the amount of refugees there, the number, I mean, not amount, sorry, very frequently the interpreter works together with social workers, and the social workers take on the human side. So they split this. The interpreter remains the language person, and there the social worker deals with the human part of this, which is it's a nice and very productive division of labor, I think.
But my question to you, Professor House, in the case of a refugee camp, when you don't have the social worker and you see the needs are enormous, can you get rid a little bit of your professional hat to act as a human being? Because you can see that people are in a desperate situation and they need help. How do you act in this case?
Well, I think it's just too much for an individual to do the interpreting, and then after, I mean, Nabil described it very, very drastically, and then they want you to help, but you can't do it. This is not your capacity. You cannot do that, and it ends in a real conflict. That's what I wanted to. That's why a social worker or an institution should take off. The situation, I don't want to praise the Germans. Germany is actually, at the moment, with the far right, and we have a new election on Sunday, whatever, is not a good example for handling refugees at the moment. I know this. And in particular, landed immigrants already act against the newcomers, which is a very sorry situation. But the interpreter is certainly overtaxed with dealing with both the human side and the translation, particularly if they want concrete help. You cannot do this for very many people. You can do it for an individual or a family or whatever, but not in general.
Absolutely, not
It's
in
just too
general.
much. It's just too much.
True. Thank you very much. Professor Trabelsi, you wanted to step in also.
Yes, just a simple remark.
Yes, please.
Very down to earth. The difference between interpreters, human interpreters, and translation machines is that human interpreters have got feelings. They have compassion. They forget sometimes that they are there to interpret, or that they are doing a job. I think if there is no compassion, if there's no feelings in what we are doing, forget about it. Don't go into interpretation. That's very down to earth, very simple remark.
Absolutely.
You're very right, I think.
Absolutely, compassion. So it is a compassion-driven profession. Yes. Any other question, Jihan? Yes, Dr. Nabil, please go ahead.
Just about the title, سباقة وجرية وما تاكلش الشعير. There's a saying in English that says, beautiful, fast, and cheap.
It's almost a literal translation, right?
It's a literal translation.
Literal translation.
That does not connote much well.
Beautiful, fast, and
Exactly,
cheap.
exactly.
Anyway.
Yes,
but you know what the
Jihan.
context is, just to explain it to our to Julian.
Yeah,
It's a proverb in Arabic. That's
Yeah.
It's a local Tunisian proverb
Mhm.
that says fast, that that wins races.
Mhm.
without any effort.
شنو هي كيفاش نقولوها الأخرى؟ هي
What else?
سباقة
جرية وسباقة وما
سباق
الشعير.
it wins
Gorge.
races.
Yeah.
It runs fast and does not eat a lot of barley, does not consume a lot of barley,
Yes.
and it's about a horse.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And
So how it
the-
goes, like it's beautiful, cheap. Beautiful.
Fast.
What did I say?
Fast and cheap.
Fast, beautiful, and cheap.
yeah.
Beautiful and cheap. Yes.
Mm.
And interpretation, it depends on context here.
Absolutely. It
The-
is still
so
context dependent.
You need, go to the context to decipher the intended meaning here.
Yeah.
Yes,
Definitely yes.
absolutely. Miss Fadlawi, any last questions?
No more questions.
No more questions. And yes, it is really, really a very insightful session with you today, ladies and gentlemen.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you.
And thank
Thank
you,
you,
Hammouda,
everyone.
for battling
Thank you.
the microphone. You finally won the war against, he doesn't hear it now.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. I really won the battle, yes, because I had to change the device altogether, and it looks like it is working fine now. Thank you, dear participants. Thank you to our incredible guest speakers for sharing their insights, their experiences, their wisdom. And I have seen a lot of wisdom here, if taken collectively. Your words, your remarks, your statements have not only informed about and inspired about encounters, about the power of language, discourse, connection, humanity, crisis situations, and intercultural misunderstanding and understanding, but also covered a lot in this menu. A heartfelt thank you as well to everyone who attended this live webinar, and also those who have joined and who are going to join our live broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for your engagement, for your questions, for your patience. You really made the conversation even more meaningful. Let's carry forward the stories, the narratives, the encounters, and the lessons shared today, using our voices to bridge as interpreters, as scholars, as researchers, as translators, as educators, and make a difference where it matters most. Until we meet next time, stay engaged, stay inspired, and keep making an impact. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Hammouda. Thank you.
Thank you.
for doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.